Hey guys, this is Kendall Terry, and this is looking at evidences of evolution that we find in nature. So first off, you got to look at what evolution, the definition would be. So you've got the obvious definition of change over time. That's the simplest one that we kind of go back to. A little bit more complex would be changes in the gene pool, and I say it's a little bit more complex is because a lot of times we don't think of evolution in that way of some kind of change in the gene pool, but that's really what's taking place when you look at evolution. Is you've got some kind of population change. There's now a new selection that takes place, and so you might get some kind of change then in the gene pool of a particular gene, of how frequently a particular trait now is going to be expressed. So maybe it's a new color, or a new way of doing something, a new ability, or the lack of an ability. So you've got some kind of change then taking place in your gene pool over time, and all of this takes place by natural selection. So natural selection is that survival of the fittest, that ability to reproduce and pass those genes down to the next generation and help those offspring achieve maturity as well. So that natural selection is kind of like that driving force that allows this change to take place. So if we're looking at evidences in evolution, really what we look for then are some key things that we can show some kind of relatedness, something that would show or indicate that there was something, a common ancestor is what we refer to it most of the time. So the first thing we look at is stuff like biogeography. This is really where Darwin would have started as well, because in biogeography you've got things that live in particular areas, and the closer they live to each other many times shows their relatedness. So here you've got two, and I think I can zoom in here, two turtles. Here's one, or tortoises, sorry. Here's one, and then here's another. Now both of these are found in the Galapagos Islands, but what we see about the Galapagos Islands is that it's actually a chain of islands. It's not just an island that sits off in out in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Ecuador, but you've got all of these different islands, and on these different islands you'll find different types of tortoises. But there's similarities, but there's a little bit of difference depending on what their food source may be on that island, how easy it is to get to certain things, the type of vegetation that's available, stuff like that. So based on what's available, you may end up with a tortoise like this living in this island, let's say, that's right here, whereas the other one on here, this one, may live in an environment where he's not having to use that long neck to get to the things that it's wanting to eat. So you've got some adaptation that's taking place in tortoises that are very close to each other, life and its location, and based on its location then we can go for and deduce commonality and common ancestry. Now you can also look at this between continents and throughout the world of where stuff is found in relation to other organisms that have similar qualities, and then looking at how those similar qualities would have drove the understanding of a common ancestor, which is a lot of what Darwin would have started with. Another evidence of evolution, and one of the ones that's used probably most often, would be the fossil record. So in the fossil record, for instance, with horses here, we've got a fossil record that takes us from this ancestor here, and you can kind of follow the evolutionary adaptations that took place all along the way. And I got another picture here that you can look at. So when we put these together and we start seeing where these fossil records of this horse, these qualities would have been found, and kind of start linking them together by small differences, but also by small, quite large similarities. So you've got these similarities that show that, yeah, these are related. They do have a common ancestor, but there's a slight difference, so it makes it a little bit different. And a lot of these organisms all ended, and they didn't make it all the way to what we see today. So you've got the horse up here that we look at today, and the qualities that it possesses, the bone structures that it has. But when you go back to the fossil record, you can see that there's obvious similarity between the bone structures of the horse that we have currently and the bone structure of this, the bone structure of this one, so on and so forth. And you can see that here. We look at a lot of things when we're looking at this from, obviously you can see the legs, so to speak, with the toes of which toes they have and which ones are touching the ground, and that sort of idea, as well as their teeth and head development, stuff like that. So you can compare a lot of things when you're looking at horse evolution, and that's what the fossil record does. It wants to look at what organisms in fossil records have similarities, which ones are no longer around that might point towards that common ancestry, comparing them to the ones that we currently have today, and using then their placement in the ground, the rocks that are around them, how old is the chemicals that we're finding in those areas, as far as the breakdown of certain isotopes and stuff like that. It gives us an idea of how old that fossil is, as well as what it might be related to. Another evidence would be what we call homologies, and this is stuff like homologous structures and vestigial structures. Homologous structures point towards a common ancestor because they have bones that are similar. It kind of goes back to that same idea that we were talking about with the fossils. So you've got here 4 limbs, a human hand. This is a dog forelimb, a bird wing like a pigeon, and then the whale flipper or fin on its side. And so when you look at the bone structure of those, you can see a commonality, a humerus, a radius and ulna, the carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges that you find. And sure enough, when you look at all of them, although they might be slightly different in shape and they may be different in function, obviously we don't use our arm the same way a bird uses its wing, or the dog uses its forelimb, or a whale uses its flipper. But all of those have commonality, and you can see a similarity in all of them. And so since there's a similarity in them, you would say there's obvious a common ancestor that those would have come from at some point. Another thing we look at is what we call vestigial structures. In vestigial structures, you've got, for instance, what we call the Darwinian. Sometimes it's just simplified to Darwinian point, and you may have a Darwinian point as well if you feel your ear right there. And that Darwinian point obviously seen in organisms all throughout the animal kingdom. And when you look, sure enough, although for us that serves no function, that's why it's vestigial, meaning it's a structure that serves no function for us, kind of like the human appendix is the one that we go to a lot. It is there. And so organisms that have common vestigial structures would show that there was a common ancestor at one point, and that common ancestor may have used that structure for something important, but over time it's lost its function. So we're looking here then at the vestigial structures that have lost their function, and that would show common ancestry as well. Next would be the DNA and proteins. Now this is one of the newer evidences of evolution, and the reason is because we're learning more about it kind of on a regular basis. As technology increases, the amount that we learn through technology obviously increases as well. So the first thing is looking at really DNA and how DNA mutation works. So to understand that, one of the things I like to think about is what we call the telephone game. And you've probably played the telephone game before, but if a person in the front of the line starts with some kind of phrase, for instance, the fat cat ate the rat, and as that phrase is passed from one person to the next person to the next person, you get a change that takes place many times in that phrase. So if you go to look at where that change took place, then you can see how that error then was passed from one person to the next. So the fat cat ate the rat, the next person got that and says the fat cat ate the rat, but then the next person hears the fat car ate the rat. So now there's been a change, and in DNA at that point, at that change, if that change doesn't kill that individual, and or if that change helps that individual survive better, natural selection would take over and allow that to be passed down then to the next generation. So now the next one says the fat car ate the bat. All of a sudden now there's a new mutation that's taken place. So now instead of it saying rat, now it says bat. So now the fat car ate the bat. And then eventually the fat car ate the bat, and then we got the far car ate the bat. So as you look at DNA, you can see how the DNA is similar and how it's different. And the ways that it's similar would show that they're closely related. But then whenever you're looking at two organisms that are very different, then that shows that they have a less common ancestor. And that's one of the ways that we look at how DNA shows common ancestry and thus evolution. Another way is looking at protein and amino acid structure, because DNA makes amino acids, and those amino acids make protein. So if we start with a particular protein, for instance, a human FGF2 gene, that's a fibroblast that helps heal wounds and stuff like that. Gene, it's a very important protein, if you will, that has a particular function. So there's two websites we can go to actually work this together, and these are shortened URLs, and you can type these in to kind of play around with them. We're going to do a lab actually using these two sites as well. So let me show you what we've got here. So in this is the first website. So if you type in up here at the top, you want the gene for human, because we're dealing with human, FGF2, that's the human growth hormone that deals with fibroblasts, and you just say search. So when you search for this, you're going to come up with apparently 190 hits that are similar to what I've just typed in. Of course, this one is for Homo sapiens, and that would be us, and that's human. That's what I typed in. So I click on it, and I'm going to get a lot of information now about the human growth hormone. And you can see there's tons of information on here that you can look at. You find out that it is on the chromosome number 4. We know a lot about this gene. If you keep scrolling way down, all the way down to the bottom, you'll get to right here where it says reference sequences. This is really what we're going for. And since we're looking at protein structure, we'll take the mRNA and protein sequence, and it's this code right here, this NM underscore. So if you click on that, what you're going to get is now information about this particular mRNA sequence as it relates to the fibroblast growth factor. So what we want to see, though, is the actual code, and that is found in the FASTA link. And if you click on FASTA, now you get what we look for in DNA. So that's the actual DNA sequence, and you can see this is every DNA base in the human FGF2 mRNA sequence. So now you can actually go and copy this all the way down, and we're going to hit copy. And then we're going to go to the second website that I told you about. So this is the second website, and it's going to go a little bit more detail in what we call BLAST. And BLAST is going to give us that comparison that we're looking for. And we're wanting to compare nucleotides, so a nucleotide BLAST. And then you're going to go right here and hit paste. So we pasted that sequence into the BLAST program. As we scroll down, we can actually look at that one in the human genomic transcript, although we know this is human, so we're going to get pretty good matches there, to a mouse genomic transcript, or we just say others, and this is just, we're going to run off of their collection, and they've got a ton of organisms in their collection. So you can go down here, and then you can hit blast. In other words, let's run this, let's see what we get. So this, it takes a couple seconds to actually run, and it actually times it right here, depending on the use of it. Sometimes that can take longer. And then you get a bunch of information here about this. So this right here tells you kind of each organism and how closely they are related, how many they have in common, but you can kind of bypass that and go down here to where it actually gives the descriptions. So the first one is the human FGF, and you notice right here it's got a value of 100%, meaning it's exactly identical. Of course, that's expected because we know that we are using human FGF2s. So sure enough, human FGF2, 100% match. That's good. But what you can also see then are organisms that have a very similar FGF2 sequence. So here you've got a gorilla FGF2 sequence, a 99% match. 99% of the genes are identical, and which makes sense. This is also a primate, and you can look these up if you're not sure what these are, like the Pongo abeli. You can actually just Google search that, and you would come up with the organism. So let's see if I can, well, we can do that later in class or whatever. We're actually going to do a whole lab using this program. So it would be good for you to just take time and go ahead and learn this program, because it's a very important program for us to do. So as you scroll down, what you find are organisms that have somewhat similar DNA sequences, but there are some differences. For instance, you get down here to some of these other organisms, and you can see that they have maybe a 94% match. So this is not a very strong match anymore. And you still, well, 84% is still pretty decent, but there's a lot of difference. So if you actually click on one of these organisms, what you find down here is then you get the original sequence that we put in up here on top, and here's the sequence that that organism has. And you can see there's missing letters sometimes. Sometimes there's letters that don't match up. The original one had an A here, and here, sure enough, is a T instead of an A. So there are some differences in this, and as you look at this one, you see there's all kinds of gaps and differences, although there are some similarities in there. As opposed to if we go back up here to the top, and we look at, for instance, the gorilla one, now when we scroll down, we see that there's a lot of similarity. There's not as many gaps anymore. There's a lot of similarity of what's going on, a lot of matching. And it's because it's 99% the same. And so that would point to relatedness. All right. So now the last one is embryo comparison. When we're looking at embryo comparison, we're looking at similarities in embryo development for common ancestry. For instance, which embryos have the gill slits that go in humans to help make a lot of different ducts and things in the ear and other areas of humans to gills in certain fish. So there's a commonality there of our embryos both possess gill slits. Now, when we're adults, we look quite different, but as embryos, there's a lot of similarity. For humans, there's the presence of a tail, and that tail is absorbed before the embryo is born as a baby, but you can look at other embryos that also possess that tail, and you can see that there's some commonality between those embryos. For instance, when you look here, you see a fish embryo, salamander, tortoise, chick, rabbit, and man, and you can see here's those gill slits that are present, and many of those embryos are possessing a lot of similar features. Here's that prehensile tail looking structure, and you can tell, it's got that curved look to it like a prehensile tail, right? So you've got these tails that are there. You've got limb development. You've got organisms that as embryos have certain characteristics, like maybe the presence of teeth, that whenever they're actually born and mature into adulthood, no longer have those teeth. Those teeth turn into some are absent, or they're modified into something else. So you can see the commonality, which would show common ancestry, but not as adults. They don't look that way. They have a lot of differences. They have a lot of different function. They have a lot of different form as adults. But as the embryo, there is a lot of similarity. And so we would say that shows signs of relatedness.